Today we are going to be putting Vatican I in context. So this council was convened in response to the rise of more secular powers, and it wanted to speak to the objective certainty of faith in a time that was increasingly dominated by relativism or this subjective understanding of truth. I want to clarify that because people go into this Vatican Council assuming it was a grab for power by Rome. I think just kind of putting in context of why it was convened maybe will help see the facts a little differently. I have an earlier video on the papacy in East and West in the early church where I use the Orthodox theologian Olivier Clément, which I'm probably still saying wrong, but he demonstrates in his book You Are Peter that the Eastern Church formally accepted the binding teaching authority of Rome, as well as papal succession through Peter, as well as the jurisdiction of Rome, most formally in the Council of Serdica. That video kind of just lays the groundwork for this video, so it's important context. You don't have to go back and watch it, but just know that's there. That's the understanding that I'm working from. But I feel like I should at least briefly acknowledge that there's obviously these tensions between East and West after that eventually led up to the Great Schism of 1054. But since this video is about Vatican I, I'm just going to move forward and not talk about that at this moment. So Papal Infallibility was defined in 1870. It means that the Pope is infallible when he speaks ex cathedra from the chair of Peter, and only when he defines a doctrine concerning faith or morals to be held by the whole Church. A key distinction right away. This is not infallibility in matters of jurisdiction or governance. We know the Church can and does err both scientifically, historically, and has made some questionable decisions regarding jurisdiction and just disciplinary actions. We would say the Church has jurisdiction, but that jurisdiction or the exercise of that jurisdiction is not infallible. Infallibility applies specifically to doctrinal teaching of faith or morals to be held universally by the entire Church. I want to bring in St. Robert Bellarmine, who writes in the era of the Protestant Reformation, the Council of Trent. He is known for his staunch defense of the papacy. But he also says that infallibility does not extend to scientific or historical accuracy, to practical governance, to jurisdiction or disciplinary actions. There's already limits of papal authority in terms of infallibility, which were then also upheld in Vatican I. So another thing about infallibility is that it's a negative charism. It protects the Church from error rather than providing new revelation. The Pope is not a source of new revelation and can't add to the deposit of faith. So infallibility is not an epistemological claim in the sense of Cartesian certainty of absolute doubt-free knowledge. He's not guaranteed to be eloquent or make perfect disciplinary decisions. It's that under very specific conditions, God prevents him from speaking error. The Catholic Church does not claim exhaustive knowledge of every single mystery, but it teaches that it has received in the deposit of faith all that is necessary for salvation. And that when it teaches that truth definitively, even that developed doctrine, it is protected from error. That still leaves a lot of gray area, right? It leaves space for mystery and growth and dialogue with science, with culture, and with history. As one final note on this before I really get started is that when the Pope defines doctrine infallibly, the core teaching is preserved from error. But that does not mean that every metaphor, every image, or cultural framework that it uses to express that truth is timeless. These core truths may need rearticulation over time. So you have to consider in Catholic teaching, first of all, who is the one speaking? Who is he speaking to? What is the cultural context of that time? And how would that person in that time have heard this doctrine? You need to consider all of those factors. There might be historically conditioned language that would have been necessary at that time period for the hearers, the recipients, to even understand what was being said in a way that they could understand it with the cultural context. However, the magisterial office has to then also articulate that core truth, not to just that time period, but also to people of the modern age. So it has to be able to speak to different historical moments, different sort of collective consciousness, not in the sense of conforming to modernism in any way, but making sure that the present age or the modern age is able to understand the core doctrine of what is being said, and that core truth is accessible in a language that they can understand considering the cultural context. So in my earlier video on the papacy, I really stressed how the collegial aspect of the church is super important for understanding the role of Peter and his successors. The church works on both the Roman or the Petrine principle of unity, as well as the Catholic or the Pauline principle of universality. So the College of Bishops is also upheld as divinely instituted. Papal infallibility does not claim that the Pope acts alone or is pit against this college in any way. I wanted to use an analogy to sort of demonstrate the relationship between the College of Bishops or the Episcopate and the papacy. So some Native American communities would carry water by tightly weaving baskets together. And then they would seal those baskets with pitch so the water wouldn't leak through even those tiny little cracks. The woven basket would represent the collegial aspect of the church, and then the pitch would represent the papacy. So both are necessary to carry the water of truth and unity over time. In the first millennium, the church functionally held doctrinal unity through this twofold structure, even before formally defining either of these elements. One's formal definition of papal infallibility is essentially saying the pitch is waterproof, but that doesn't work without the woven basket to apply it to. So that would be the bishops in the wider church. So interestingly, Pope Benedict XVI, when he was Cardinal Ratzinger, wrote in Principles of Catholic Theology that for reunification with with the Orthodox Church, Rome would only need to require a return to how the papacy was practiced in the first millennium, without needing a formal approval of the dogmatic formulation of Vatican I. Rome must not require more from the East with respect to the doctrine of primacy than had been formulated and was lived in the first millennium. We've talked about in my video on the papacy how the East had already lived out papal primacy in practice, accepting Rome's jurisdiction and its binding teaching authority, without formally defining it as papal infallibility. So for us Roman Catholics, infallibility is like the divine waterproofing element of the basket. So infallibility would be this waterproof element of the pitch. I think Rome is very conscious of what it means to be responsible for binding teaching. If Rome has this huge responsibility for binding teaching given by God, which I've made the case for in my Apostolic Succession playlist, then it is logically necessary that God keeps Rome from error. Because the church is sacramental, right? And it is Christ, the chief shepherd, the chief guardian of souls, who is in charge. He is truly active and present in the church. He leads us, right? In the ascension, he leads us. He goes ahead of us. He's not still walking the earth as we are, but he does not abandon us or the church to human fallibility. He is the one that is guarding and protecting his church. Many in the East already affirm that Rome held a primacy, that her voice carried real doctrinal weight, that Rome was often considered a guardian of orthodoxy. And they might not dissect the molecular structure of the pitch, but they still see that the basket held water. So what Cardinal Ratzinger is saying here in regards to the Orthodox and Vatican I is that they do not need to accept the formulation of the pitch as being waterproof, of the molecular structure of the pitch, to trust that the basket holds water. So rather than insisting on them adopting this microscopic language of infallibility that's formally defined centuries after the schism, we just have to ask that they accept the function of the church's preservation of truth as had been shared in the first millennium. The church always carried the water. Vatican I just explained why it did not leak. Okay, so moving into primacy. Along with infallibility, Vatican I also defined papal primacy or supremacy. The Pope has supreme, full, immediate, and universal jurisdiction over the entire church as the successor of St. Peter. Similarly to the analogy of the infallibility as being this microscopic formulation, this formulation of supremacy is an ontological expression of the papacy and not an indication of how it should be practiced. So for Rome, both the papacy and the college were divinely instituted. You really can't isolate this statement from the Petrine principle or the Roman principle of unity. The idea of unity only makes sense if there's things to unite, right? Unity only makes sense within the context of the Pauline universality. So to act as supreme pope alone, to unilaterally make decisions, would essentially be pitted against the essential nature of the office, which is to serve unity of the entire church. This formulation does not overpower the collegial role of the bishops. What this formulation is essentially saying is that the authority given to Rome is real ontological authority. It's not a democratic authority because it was given by God. And Vatican I was intended to address both the papacy and the collegial role of the bishops. That was on the agenda. But then that plan was cut short because of the outbreak of the Franco-Prussian War. In September 1870, the Italian troops invaded Rome. They annexed it to the Kingdom of Italy. And then Pope Pius IX had to suspend Vatican I. The council was never formally closed, but it simply stopped meeting due to the issues that were going on. So many topics, like the role of bishops, were left undeveloped until Vatican II, nearly a century later. And this was also affirmed in the Council of Trent, the idea that the Episcopate was divinely instituted. Despite this acknowledgement of the divinely instituted Episcopate, there were serious concerns, especially coming out of Germany, that the Pope now had unchecked power. In response, the German bishops issued a clarification in 1875. This is called the Fulda letter, that was completely approved by Pope Pius IX, who convened Vatican I. This letter, I found it, actually. I did not think I could find it, but it was on the State Department website, and I'll link that in the description. Very much worth the read. So this letter strongly affirms episcopal authority. I first learned of it through then Father Ratzinger's essay in Episcopate and the Primacy. He included a great summary of its points in a theological journal from 1957. The Pope cannot arrogate to himself the episcopal rights, nor substitute his power for that of the bishops. The episcopal jurisdiction has not been absorbed into the papal jurisdiction. The Pope was not given the entire fullness of the bishop's powers by the decrees of the Vatican Council. He has not virtually taken the place of each individual bishop. He cannot put himself in the place of a bishop in each single instance vis-a-vis governments. The bishops have not become instruments of the Pope. They are not officials of a foreign sovereign in their relations with their own governments. This clarification is hugely important because it shows that Vatican I did not destroy episcopal collegiality, and it laid the theological groundwork for Vatican II, which would later expand on the College of Bishops in Lumen Gentium in 1964. So Vatican I defined papal infallibility, but it wasn't in a vacuum. It reaffirmed that the church is guided and protected by God. It didn't eliminate mystery, nuance, or dialogue. And it didn't turn the Pope into like a kind of oracle. So it was a defense of unity and truth in an age of relativism, not a divine power grab. So now that we've kind of identified some of the obstacles or kind of what stands in the way of unity, I will share my thoughts on kind of what I think reunification with the Orthodox, between the Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church might look like. Firstly, I consider the Orthodox, because of their valid Eucharistic communion, to be part of the one true church. I honestly don't know if the Orthodox, at least like the lay people, understand that the amount of respect that Rome has for the Eastern Church. Cardinal Ratzinger mentions in Principles of Catholic Theology how the formulation of a powerful symbolum, something like the Nicene Creed, would be impossible to do without the entire church. So he says, as an episcopal symbol, the text is an instrument of unity for the whole church in what concerns the fundamental understanding of the faith proclaimed at baptism. The ecumenical Catholic character is essential to it. Only the episcopacy of the whole church can be the official channel for the formulation of such a text. It must be said that even after the schism of 1054, this includes also the episcopacy of the Eastern churches, for as a legitimate episcopacy of churches that have preserved intact the heritage of faith, they continue to be an integral part of the church as a whole. A council consisting only of the churches of the West could therefore never formulate a text with such a claim. As for like the obstacles of Vatican I like what Pope Benedict XVI has said on that. If it's acceptable for the East to practice and function like they did in the first millennium, then any formal acknowledgement of Vatican I is like superfluous, because it's not necessary in practice to have to hold to that. There's different frameworks that touch on different facets of reality, different aspects. Rome isn't saying Orthodox theology is illegitimate. Then they ask that in return, that there's different frameworks for understanding a single truth. I also wanted to highlight a great article by Eric Ibarra. He shared it just a few days ago. I thought it was excellent. And he brings in an insight from Father Francis Dvornik, that I think that's how you say it. Even when the Pope defines something infallibly, he does so only after consulting the mind of the whole Church, meaning Scripture, tradition, and the bishops, and the witness of the bishops. So the Pope's teaching has real authority, not because it receives consent from others, but because it faithfully expresses the faith already present in the Church. And then he says that's actually very close to the Orthodox view, where the Church as a whole is infallible, right? We've got the reeds and the pitch both together keep in the water. And then that would be especially as voiced through the Episcopate. So even though there's a difference in structure, there is a shared truth that truth is not invented. It's received, it's confessed, and the Holy Spirit preserves that truth in the life of the Church. So if we can agree that infallibility is about divine protection, not unilateral power, and that the Pope's judgments must reflect the Church's faith and not override it, then I think we have real room for like meaningful reconciliation with the East. I also have one comment where somebody said when Rome sets itself up as an unquestionable authority, that's where things go wrong. And Rome does not do that. Human subjectivity is really at the heart of this. So the idea is that we have the ability to think, we have the ability to truly be inspired by Christ on a personal level, by the Holy Spirit. We have real workings here, our own personal conscience that is just us and God. Rome, it gives certain teaching, but it's still up to us not to just blindly accept that. Like, it's not just something that's handed down to us like we're objects. We really have to engage with it and make it truly our own. As a convert, I had to wrestle through every single issue, and it belongs to me. It's not like I'm coming out of blind obedience to Rome. I never have done that. I don't think that is how Rome wants it. It informs the conscience. It does not replace the conscience. I think that's really important. I'm going to talk more about the role of personal conscience and keeping coercion out of Catholicism with a guest interview again coming up. I'm going to start doing more public penance of kind of addressing some of the jurisdictional, questionable disciplinary decisions of the Church historically and in now, not in this attitude of like having to reject anything that I believe, but saying there's obstacles here that are keeping the Church from living out its own theology very well. And how can we remove those obstacles so that we don't contribute to counter witness and spiritual abuse? So if that interests you and you'd like to stay notified on that, please subscribe if you feel so inclined, and thank you for watching.